Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of the Legal Lunch Bite. I am thrilled today to welcome Cindy Ojogbo from Centurion Law Group. She's based in Johannesburg, South Africa. It's been over a year since we've caught up, and so I'm really looking forward to talking to Cindy and hearing about what she has, what she's been seeing in her marketplace. Cindy, welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's great to be on the show. And just to say, we've rebranded this year. We're now CLG.
CLG, thank you. That's a good point. All right, so CLG, and please tell us where the firm has offices. Where are you? Because you're in quite a few African countries.
Yeah, we're actually across the entire continent, really. Our headquarters is in Johannesburg, but we have offices in, I think, about 15 countries. And in the countries where we don't have offices, we do have, affiliate networks servicing clients in those regions. So if you had any, legal, tax, business advisory, requirements in Africa, we are your go-to, really.
Excellent. That's fantastic to know. I didn't realize how widespread you were. That includes the North African countries above the Saharan Desert.
Correct.
All right. Excellent. Perfect. So tell us what your particular practice has been focused on.
It's been a very interesting journey for me. I think I initially started out in core power infrastructure and finance, corporate M&A type instructions. And I did that whilst in Nigeria and then in New York for a bit. And when I joined CLG, when it was still Centurion, I then sort of segued into oil and gas. And that's where I've been for the last 7-8 years. And it just involves, oil and gas mandates across Africa. We've worked on big ticket transactions, very, very significant epoch-making transactions, from all the way west to Nigeria to Ghana, Equatorial Guinea, and up, South Africa as well. And in Namibia, the green markets, we've been doing a lot of work there in the energy space. So we're very the firm actually started out as an energy, oil and gas focused firm. It was very focused, and then we expanded into, full suite service law firm that now offers, other professional services like tax, business advisory, insurance, HR, compliance, and the likes.
That's great. And so in Africa, can you do tax and legal together in the same house? I'm saying tax compliance, like CPAs. Do you have those in house? Or are you saying tax compliance, other research?
We do. That's actually an interesting question because it differs from jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. So in Nigeria, where I started my practice, you can't actually have those together, legal and tax. But in Central Africa, CEMAC regions, Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon, and the likes, you can have them combined in one firm. So in the countries where we're allowed to do that, we have it combined. And then we have a general tax advisory from the HQ that sort of overlooks the entire practice across Africa. And in countries where we can't have it combined in one entity, we have, it's separated, the legal and the tax, but we still sort of offer the services as a combined offering to our clients.
That's great because that's two sides of the coin. And in the U.S. market, we have tax and legal separate. So I'm always interested to hear that. And I know in the European shops, they can combine, at least a lot of the people I've talked to in Europe. So yeah, very interesting. Okay, so originally oil and gas, but I know you have a bit of an entertainment background as well. Is that right? Entertainment, sports?
I do. It started out more personally for me. I like entertainment. So I sort of engaged in that separate from my legal practice. I was in the entertainment department practice when I was working in Nigeria, and I did a bit of it freelancing, and I sort of started the sports and entertainment practice in CLG here, and I sort of straddled that with a few colleagues of mine who are entirely focused on that, whilst I straddle, between different practices at CLG. But yeah, we do a lot of sports and entertainment work. Personally, I am a big sports fan, so it sort of feeds into a more personal desire of mine.
That's great. So, and all sports, or do you have particular interests?
I do have particular interests. All sports generally, but I definitely love football, American football, actual football.
I understand.
UFC, mixed martial arts.
That's great. We have this, so we're recording. This probably won't go live until for a few days, but we have the UFC in Salt Lake City, my hometown, this weekend in conjunction with FightCon. So I think the tickets are minimum. The ones that are left are minimum $400, I think. So I'm not going to be able to go, but it's there's a pretty good market here where I live as well. That's interesting. I wouldn't expected that from you, but that's very cool.
That's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I think it's one of my, most people don't like it. I find it very violent, but it's one of my best ones. And I
Yeah,
think that this weekend is the Alex Pereira fight.
I think that's
think,
right.
yeah, with Roundtree, and I'm definitely going to watch that one. And then I like tennis because I actually play tennis, so it's actually just comes naturally to me. And Formula One and basketball, yes, and some other sports that I just enjoy watching in the weekends.
That's great. And so, are those all growing on the continent? Is it are those picking up? I mean, UFC fighting, NASCAR, not NASCAR, Formula One. Like, are those growing in interest?
Yes, yes, they actually are growing in interest, especially since I think we had three champions before, and now we just have one. That is the South African. I'm forgetting his name. At the UFC. And then I know that the UFC had poached a Senegalese Rug from Senegalese wrestling and took him to the UFC. And then now he's in one championship. So there's a lot of interest with that. We have a lot of contact sports, men and women on the continent. It's not really, I would say that it's not very well funded, so it's not a big industry. I think it's only really big and adequately funded in South Africa because they have a league, the EFC or something, and then the sport itself is done sort of more informally in West Africa, like Nigeria and Senegal and the other countries, while Senegalese wrestling, for example, is like super big in Senegal and they produce a lot of stars. And I know that the UFC and the One Championship guys like to poach from Senegal because they have a very advanced contact sports market.
Let's turn to a more broader discussion because Africa has always been a fascinating place to me growing up in the U.S. Just a huge continent, so diverse in terms of population and resources. I'm curious at this point in time, let's take the last year or two, how is the business environment? What are you feeling? How are people feeling about the future? And maybe discuss a few of the industries that continue to grow, and maybe some geographic locations that people who are interested in Africa could think about.
Great. I think Africa is an interesting market. Sometimes we hate to be lumped into one market, but
Yeah, of course, of course.
it's inevitable sometimes, especially in discussing it like this. I would personally want to speak from, say, I would take oil and gas as an example, and I'll do that because that's the industry I'm more in, and I think it is one of the largest resources on the continent for most countries. Really forms, the largest exports for most of the richest, African countries like Nigeria, for example, and North African countries. So with oil and gas, I would say that the market has been very interesting since COVID and since the energy transition discussion. Of course, there was a dip in the market, largely because most of the traditional funders or financiers of the market had sort of moved or sort of integrated a mandate not to fund or not to finance, fossil fuel. And so there's I think a few years, I would say like 21, 22, even 23, there's a lot of talk of, we're not funding, oil and gas transactions. And a few countries have sort of had to stand their ground and say, we're going to explore our natural resources because it's really what we have, and we need that to industrialize, and build adequate infrastructure. And then, subsequently, once we've done that, we can then start talking or thinking about the transition, because there's really nothing to transition from at the moment.
Sure, yeah.
Also trying to incorporate, clean energy projects to balance out, any emissions and any, environmental threats from oil and gas activities. So the industry did dip a lot. We saw a very, very, very significant drop in investments and even projects, especially for a country like Nigeria, the biggest, oil and gas producing country on the continent. There was practically almost nothing for a few years. And to be honest, I would say it was, whilst the energy transition discussion played a big role, also the fact that the Nigerian market sort of suffered from a few regulatory issues that also sort of affected some of the inflow of foreign direct investments, because the country suffered economically. So the naira dropped. The return on investments was significantly lower for investors, and of course it took a long time to pass the petroleum industry. PIA, the acts, the sort of the regulatory landscape was sort of it wasn't clear. People weren't sure what was happening and what would happen, so that affected a lot of things. But interestingly, and I think is would attribute it to some financiers and some oil and gas companies or private companies sort of taking a stand and trying to sort of push back and focus more on the industry. There's been like I think a growth or an increase in investments in the last year. There are a number of M&As that have sort of increased the capitalization of the industry from South Africa, downstream M&A between Vitol and Engine, to the recent purchase between Owando and ENI of ENI's assets in Nigeria. There has been, and Namibia, interestingly, which is the new market, there has been a growth in M&A activities across the continent, and that has sort of created a positivity or positive outlook in terms of where the industry is going and what we can expect for the future. So yeah, and then markets like new markets like Namibia and Mozambique, and there's been some sort of positivity as well. I'll give you an example. The Mozambican oil and gas market suffered significantly a few years ago because of internal issues. There were a few riots and things like that, and so production halted. Especially international companies were not, comfortable or confident in the economy to continue production. But with new measures being put in place, government trying to create a way to incorporate the local market into the industry and sort of dealing with local and political instability, then the Mozambican market sort of picking up again. So you can see some traction with a few companies like ENI, sort of starting or restarting operations in the region. So there is some positivity and some traction across the continent as far as oil and gas energy is concerned. And that is sort of a good indication of what's happening on the continent and the confidence that investors and even the local players are sort of seeing in the market, and how they see potential growth in the industry. And that's a good thing for anyone sort of thinking of participating or operating across Africa. And even countries where I'd like to just point out, even countries where they've been political instability, like in the Central African region, where they've been coups. And typically it does affect production, it does affect operations, and we've seen a few that have been affected by it. But certain countries that sort of this coups are sort of creating a more stable regulatory environment for businesses. So there is some level of confidence in the fact that the entire regulatory landscape is not sort of disrupted because of coups, and then these governments are creating some form of stability, and you can sort of project based on the activities and rely on the market in some way. So yeah, I would say that there is some positivity, and then there's a lot of government, there's a lot of, I say, government activity or proactivity in government. We're seeing that, as opposed to traditionally when the government would just sort of relax and want private companies to come in, bring all the money in, drill, and then just pay, and then export all of the resources, all of the finances, and nothing is in the country. We're seeing more proactivity from government in trying to make sure that there's retention of capital or finances in the country, and there's more local participation, and that the industry is more sort of a collaborative operation between government and private investors, especially foreign investors. And interestingly, there's even a lot of local participation as well. In a country like Nigeria, the biggest M&A activity coming out of Nigeria this year is from a local company, Owando, purchasing ENI's assets. And even there was a consortium of 5 independent Nigerian operators purchasing, I think that was Shell's assets as well. So you see a lot of local participation, a lot of empowerment for local companies to participate and take charge and also contribute to the exploitation or exploration of these assets. And I draw that parallel to a country like Namibia, that's just sort of a green oil and gas country just starting out. A few huge finds, oil and gas discoveries from Total Energies, Galp, Chevron, and the likes. They're also on the verge of sort of creating a local content or local participation system as well. And that's a good time, because the country is just starting out in the oil and gas operations, and it's good to sort of involve locals at this stage. And they're drawing sort of from the lessons from countries like Nigeria that I think it took more than 20 years or 30 years to even have, actually more than 50. I think oil and gas was first discovered in Nigeria in the 60s, and we didn't have a local content law until 2010. So that's a
Wow.
very long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Country like Namibia, sort of thinking ahead and sort of trying to stopgap any future, issues that might sort of come up, by sidelining locals in terms of participating in the industry. So you see such a positive response to some of these new activities and operations across the continent, and so that gives like a positive outcome or outlook on where the industry is going for the future.
That's so interesting. Well, our 15 minutes are already up, Cindy. I knew it always goes by quickly, but I have really enjoyed hearing the update, the latest. We'll definitely have to chat again. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. It was great to be on the show.